if you travel to Dubai, sometimes there are actually names, Bani Yas. Tribe, it's a tribe basically, Bani Yas, so that means tribe of Yas. So this is one of the indications. So Bani Israel is basically the children of, descendants of, inshallah ta'ala, who are the descendants of? Yaqub alayhi salam. So Yaqub alayhi salam, we should call him Bani Yaqub. So the other name of Yaqub alayhi salam is Israel. That's the reality is that's one of the names of the country today. But the descendants of Yaqub alayhi salam, one of the descendants obviously we all know is Yusuf alayhi salam. So Yusuf alayhi salam, he had his and obviously all his brothers, and eventually they go back to Egypt. So that is a story that many of they go back to Bilad al-Sham, which is the Levant area today, after they were actually living under oppression. The first ayah itself, I won't go into generally what I've noticed from all my experience, talking about the Quran. When I go word by word, most people tend to fall asleep. So I will tend to give you a general gist of the surah. Maybe I'll start with ayah number 2, since I'll stick to the topic of Bani Israel, and inshallah ta'ala, if we have more time, we will go into some few ayahs that are extremely important for us to understand. In ayah number 2, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention is وَآتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ وَجَعَلْنَاهُ هُدًى لِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ أَلَّا تَتَّخِذَ مِن دُونِي وَلِيًّا. One of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention that He has given Musa alayhi salam al-kitab. If you read the books of tafsir in reference to Tawrah, وَجَعَلْنَاهُ هُدًى لِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ, and we made it a form of guidance for them, and that they shall not take anybody else as a wakil, as a disposer, as a helper, and not to worship anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the following ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about ذُرِّيَّةً مِنْ حَمَلْنَا مَعَ نُوحٍ إِنَّهُ كَانَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Now every single one of us, one of the scholar things that they mentioned is ذُرِّيَّةً مِنْ whoever actually was with Nuh alayhi salam. Many of us have mentioned many times over here, فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُغْرَقِينَ, I mentioned even his own son had drowned, and there was only few people that got aboard the boat of Musa alayhi salam. So whoever traveled with Nuh alayhi salam, every single one of us today, we go back to also the descendants of Nuh alayhi salam. So inshallah ta'ala, one of the ways we can, inshallah ta'ala, if any time looks down upon another tribe or other country or other ethnicity, there is an honor that every single one of us have, that is, we are descendants of Adam alayhi salam, and we're also the descendants of Nuh alayhi salam. So before we dishonor somebody based off their ethnicity or anything else, somebody or something that you don't like, remember this is that same descendant of Nuh alayhi salam and the descendant of Adam alayhi salam. Now the following ayah itself is what is going to be very important, and I'm sure there's many videos. I was listening to some of the modern tafsirs when it comes to Bani Israel. So before I go into that ayah, there is two things I want to talk about. One is when they talk about qada kawni and qada shar'i. Inshallah, that's what the following ayah will talk about. Whenever Allah decrees something, let's just say there's prohibitions, commandments, all that is shar'i. It's a legislation given to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we may obey it, we may not obey it, but in the hereafter we may be taken into account. The other one is the qada kawni, is what the universal decree itself is, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may decree that this person is born here, this person is going to be passing away in this land, this is the rizq that he's going to get. All of this is qada kawni. Now in this ayah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention وَقَضَى إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed in their books, and this is kawni, it was mentioned in their books, or in the book, لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ, that they shall actually transgress in the land, and they shall reach a position of arrogance itself. So there's one time that we know for sure they had a big kingdom, which was the kingdom many of us heard the story of Dawood alayhi salam, Sulaiman alayhi salam. This is that kingdom that eventually gets destroyed by Bukhtanasar. This was one of the Persian kings at that point of time. He destroys Bani Israel. So this we know at least one time that happened to them. If you were to open up Ibn Kathir on any of these books today, they don't talk about the modern state that we have today. So usually they will tell you that فَإِذَا جَعْوَالُ أُولَاهُمَ بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا. So when they actually did that first corruption, here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا, that He sent upon the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أُولِي بَأْسٍ شَدِيدٍ فَجَاسُوا خِلَالَ الدِّيَارِ وَكَانَ وَعْدٌ مَفْعُولًا. So He sent upon them the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who were actually stronger than them, and they actually overtook them, and they were actually defeated, and this was a done deal. So this is something that actually happened. Now, if you read the old traditional books of tafsir, what they will generally find, if you open up Ibn Kathir, any of this, what you will typically find is that it already happened twice. So because here it tells that you shall cause corruption on land twice. So I can mention the Sheikh's name, who actually obviously has some modern interpretations. One of the things that he brought up, Sheikh Dudu, I mean, most of the Arabs will know Sheikh Dudu. One of the things that he mentioned when I was listening to him was, he said that we know the only time they had a powerful kingdom was at the time of Dawud alayhi salam, that was completely destroyed. Now some other people may say, what about the Byzantine and all those things that happened? But we know for once it already happened. And the next following ayah, generally the following ayah that talks about, there's ikhtilaf, especially the modern scholars, when it talks about ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا لَكُمْ كَرَّةَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَمْدَدْنَاكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about giving this nation wealth, He talks about giving them وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا, and He made you a lot more in terms of numbers. Now the ones that say this is not referring to Bani Israel itself, this is somebody else. And Sheikh Dudu, I think some of you may say, he has the interpretation that Bani Israel was never most in terms of people, they were always less, even till date. In fact, the Palestinians are actually more than children of Israel, just Palestinians alone. Some will tell you, some of the Arab descendants of the Jewish people, if you include them, they're not in a comparison in numbers. They call them Isra, inshallah, if you guys can look them up. So this was one of the things, but usually most people, they took the position that again they were honored after they were actually destroyed the first time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does them with wealth, with children. But today what the scholars point out typically is that, and why they do that is because before obviously a certain 70, 80 years ago, there was no certain state, right? So generally, most of the Mufassirun from back in the days, the general assumption was that they had caused corruption on the land twice, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them. That's it. And the general interpretations of the old school, if you listen to any of the old Jewish, before the creation, the traditional position before World War I was that they're never going back to the Holy Land. And that position obviously changed when obviously the Holocaust happened and all the other things. But by default, even the position of all the scholars at that point of time, this is a done deal. And now when you have people rethinking this particular part, is that وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا, is that they've actually mentioned that they were never, in terms of numbers, they were always low. And even till date, since you brought them, all of them into that one land, even the people of Palestine are much more in number than the children of Israel itself. So in one thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention is, and this will apply to any single one of us, in أحسنتم لأنفسكم وإن أسأتم فلها فإذا جاء وعد الآخرة ليسوء وجوههم وليدخلوا المسجد كما دخلوه أول مرة وَلِيُتَبِّرُوا مَا عَلَوْا تَتْبِيرًا. This is the last part in this particular ayah. Whoever does good, who are you doing for? In one ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning in the quote, مَا يَهْتَدِي فَإِنَّمَا يَهْتَدِي لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَنْ ضَلَّ فَإِنَّمَا يَدِلُ عَلَيْهَا. So let's say if somebody is doing any righteous acts, it is going to go back to you. And if someone is going to do something evil, it is again going to go back to you. In the following part, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ, this is the second part, is when they will cause corruption twice, when the second time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send upon them a strong nation, لِيَسُوءُ وُجُوهَهُمْ, i.e. their faces will be humiliated, and they shall enter وَلْيَدْخُلُ الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ, and they shall enter the masjid just like they entered before itself. Now this is what many of the scholars have said, that the Muslims will enter the masjid as they previously entered. And we know the Muslims have actually had control of the land, and they shall actually enter to this land once more again. So if you were to traditionally take, and I'm sure you'll find many amongst the Arab speakers, many people I have noticed amongst a lot of the scholars, they have slightly changed some of their opinions when it comes to, has there ever been a mighty nation for Bani Israel other than the time of Sulaiman alayhi salam, which was actually brought down? Was there a nation after that? And the general assumption traditionally was there was two, and it was actually taken down. But today, in our day and time, people have started to change the position, and they have said no, there was only once that they actually had a strong nation where they were able to establish themselves. And one of the things that they point out is that they were never, in terms of numbers, they were always less. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention that we have given you children, wealth, وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا, we have made you many in number, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to the Muslim, and that inshallah wa ta'ala that they shall enter the masjid just like how they entered before. Now, having mentioned this, if you were to, I'm sure some of the imams will talk about it as the children of Israel caused corruption on the land twice, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had destroyed them. But today you have all of these few things that I mentioned today. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But what we know is, in the end of times, obviously there will be all of these clashes that will be happening. I don't want to go into every single one of these things. But today, when you guys go back home, inshallah ta'ala, try to read about Surah Al-Isra. I will give you few pointers that every single one of us, in page number, at least in this book, is 282. Now we can cover 283 and 284. I'll mention only a few ayahs because I don't have too much time. One of the things that I want to mention about is إن هذا القرآن يهدي للتي هي أقوم ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا كبيرا. Let me take it easy, inshallah. One of the ayahs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every single one of us, we recite this ayah, Maliki yawmiddin. Every single one of us, anybody who's praying, لا صلاة لمن يقرأ بفاتحة الكتاب, there is no prayer without the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. And one ayah that we are actually consistently reminded of is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the master on the day of judgment. In one of the ayat in Surah Al-Isra, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention is, on the day of judgment, obviously, then every single one of us will be facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of this ayah, اقرأ كتابك كفى بنفسك اليوم عليك حسيبا, that read your scroll. When the scroll will be spread across, every single one of us, on that day there is no denying, because this is the reality that every single one of us, we're all writing a book right now. The book that the Malaika are actually writing, the book of deeds, good, bad, all the things that we did, all the things that we were planning, we wanted to do, but sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not decree it. All of those things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be putting forth in front of us, and He will be told, read from your scroll. And the other thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned is, من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رسولا. So whosoever guides, who is he when he does any good deed? This is strictly for himself, and whosoever goes astray, he is obviously the one that is going astray, and he is the one who is going to be taken into account. One particular thing, one person shall not carry the sin of another. So let's say in our day and time, you may have a dad who's a sinner, but a son may be very righteous. Now a son will not have to carry, we have the likes of Ibrahim alayhi salam. His own father did not believe, in fact, in Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he did not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So a person, when he goes and meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is going to be carrying the sin and the good deeds of himself. And a person will not carry a deed of another person unless, if you, let's just say you pointed somebody towards something that is khayr, there's a statement which goes back to hadith أَدَالُ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ كَفَاعِلِهِ, that one who points somebody towards the good is as though he did it himself, then you're getting hasanat in this case. Other than that, by default, you will be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your own deeds. And then in the last part of this ayah, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا, and then we shall not punish anybody until we send amongst them a messenger. So I want to take one particular ruling from this. Generally, who are the people of paradise? If somebody were to ask you, if a non-Muslim were to ask you, what is the path to salvation for Muslims? How would somebody answer this? It's a very easy question. You always hear إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. So if somebody were to ask you, what is the path to salvation? I'm saying this because it happened in one of the open houses this was in Massachusetts. A lady pastor, she walked up to one of the young girls who was presenting about Islam in the masjid, and she asked her, what happens to people like me? Basically the ones who don't believe in your religion. And her response was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, which obviously is an answer, but so we have to also know how to figure out this. If somebody were to ask you as an adult, what is the path to salvation? How would you answer them? There is one particular part where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I told you, to every وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي لِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنْ يَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. To every nation we have sent a Rasul and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to abstain from any sort of taghut. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of, so what is our belief when it comes to path to paradise? What do we have to do? This is not a hard question.
Believe in one God?
Believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the other one? There's a foundation. We as Muslims, we have to believe in certain things. Now, actions changes from person to person. What is the foundation that you need to have?
Belief in the Prophet. Belief in Allah.
So the 6 pillars of Islam and then your 5 pillars of faith is your foundation. This is when it comes to aqdi, when it comes to belief, this is your foundation. The action, so that means you have to believe in these certain things, and then you have to do righteous deeds, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may forgive somebody on the day of judgment, or He may punish somebody and then eventually put somebody in the hellfire, provided that he had these foundations. You may be asked these questions, especially if you're doing street da'wah. I'm sure Imam Jawad has a lot of experience with street da'wah. Some of the brothers will ask you these questions, and sometimes they have good intentions, and sometimes not so good intentions. This is just to put you in a spot to see how you respond to them, and they want to put you in a real great position. And that's really, I felt, because if you were to ask a middle school, high school girl, I'm not sure what the intention there was. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but at least we need to train our younger folks and how you can answer these questions. Her answer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, which is not a wrong answer, but at the same time, we have to say our path to salvation in our belief is that you have to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to do righteous deeds. And this is a foundational statement that we need to make. If we don't have this, and if we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, then there is not, then she might say, okay, I'm going to do righteous deeds, and we have a very foundation. Now there are people that may not hear the message of Islam. In our day and time, I find it very difficult, honestly, because I have gone to small towns for some work or something there, and all of them seem to have heard of Islam. They all have some sort of decent idea. Maybe they don't know the details of fiqh. I was even talking to one of the imams who has a rebirth background, and he himself said at the time when there was no internet, he learned about Islam in school. So the general excuse of, we haven't heard, but let's just say there are people, there may be people at the time, there may be people somewhere in the Amazon jungle, they haven't heard of anything. Now there is one narration, some of the scholars have questioned the authenticity of the narration, that their test will be on the day of judgment. Generally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just, as He mentions, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا, that He shall not punish somebody until He sends a messenger amongst them. And it is from the ultimate justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will only punish somebody if it's truly deserving of punishment. So when somebody passes away, what you and I can do, if the non-Muslim passes at work, you can say, my condolences go out to you, and just stop right there. But when you say RIP and all of these other, now you're going into making dua, because generally when somebody passes away, the one who's deserving of your dua are the believers, and the rest don't say anything. If you want, you can say, my condolences go out to you. The Prophet ﷺ himself was restricted from making dua for his own mother itself. So somebody who gave birth to the Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because what we know of her was that she died upon she didn't die upon Islam. So we will judge with what is apparent, and we leave their affair to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe they accepted Islam, maybe they never received the message. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But if they died upon disbelief, for us, they died upon disbelief. And the one that is deserving of paradise is the one that died upon Iman. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not punish anybody in the hereafter until He sends amongst them a messenger. For those people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test them in the hereafter. And so inshallah ta'ala, hopefully this gave you some foundation. Some kids usually get, if they're in school, high school, even when I try to talk to some people about Islam, this is one of the questions. Inshallah, hopefully none of you have to deal with this question. But if you ever do, at least give them the foundation that you have to believe in Islam. And then obviously if you have the belief of the you can go into the details if you wish to. But do not shy away and just say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, because that one door of da'wah that you have, if you shut it, this might be your last one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. How many minutes do I have before I conclude? Where is 10 more? Okay, inshallah. There is few things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention. Is one of the things, since I spoke about the hereafter being for the believers, in one ayah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention, a few ayahs later, من كان يريد العاجلة عجلنا له فيها ما نشاء لمن نريد ثم جعلنا له جهنم يصلاها مذموما مدحورا. There's two ayahs I'll mention in English after that. ومن أراد الآخرة سعى لها سعيها وهو مؤمن فأولئك كان سعيهم مشكورا. So two things, whoever rushes to achieve in terms of dunya, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide for them. He will bring forth whatever they wish. ثم جعلنا له جهنم, and then He shall give them the hellfire. يصلاها, and they shall enter it humiliated. ومن أراد الآخرة, and whosoever wishes the hereafter. وهو مؤمن, and he is a believer. فأولئك كان سعيهم مشكورا, and then for them, for their race and their strive is, so mashkura generally is somebody that is thanked. And one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Shakir. When they translate that, they write grateful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not grateful to any one of us. But when they usually explain this, when they write the sharh and they write the explanation of it, when they hear Inna Allah Shakirun Alim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they translate it, they will say He's grateful and He's the all-knowing. What they mean by that is that any small deed you do, good deed you do, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward you for it, either multiple folds or at least you would get one fold of it. And this is Shakir and Ali, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to compensate you for whatever you do. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention, وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ, when he strives for the hereafter and he is a believer, فَأُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ سَعِيهُمْ مَشْكُورًا, that his strive shall be thanked. To this translation. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the following ayah makes mention of that He gives to the ones who actually believe and disbelieve. But there is one particular part that all of us can focus on. انظر كيف فضلنا بعضهم على بعض وللآخرة أكبر درجات وأكبر تفضيلا. Look at how we have preferred some over the other. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ أَكْبَرُ دَرَجَةٍ, and the hereafter is of a higher, let's just say, level. وَأَكْبَرُ تَفْضِيلًا. One other ayah, some of us today, mashallah, we have good cars, we king, we have a good life. And another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention, وَاللَّهُ فَضَّلَ بَعْدَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْدٍ فِي الرِّزْقِ. Some He may prefer some over the other in rizq. Some of you may be rich, Some of you may be poor. Some of you have done very little, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you a good job. You tried a business, it clicked. This is from the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's an ayah also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, انظر كيف فضلنا بعضهم على بعض. Look at how we have preferred some of you over the others. Sometimes a Nabi is preferred over another Nabi. Sometimes a person is preferred over another person in terms of wealth. But وَلَلْآخِرَةُ أَكْبَرُ دَرَجَاتٍ. But the hereafter is of a higher level and a higher preference. So if somebody, sometimes it is not purely knowledge. There are many people you will meet. I remember Imam Jawad used to set up tables at one of these restaurants. We used to set up a table, and I remember giving da'wah to this person. I'm sure I've mentioned this a couple of years ago. I remember talking to him. He spoke about the foundation of our Islam. I was explaining him, okay, malaika and this and that. I was excited because this last week he got a shahada. So I was like, oh, subhanAllah, I'm going to get another shahada. And he said, I agree. And then I was like, oh, do you want to take the shahada? And he was like, no. He just said, I don't want to become Muslim. Just like that. And I asked him why, and he said, maybe arrogance. He himself said it. There are many people that may believe that this is the truth, but they don't want to submit. So even if you have the knowledge, the action is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to give you tawfiq. There are many academics that can teach Islam. There are many YouTubers. I am amazed with the details of theology they can explain about all the Islamic schools. He's not Muslim. He will go into the details of theology. This school, this school, this school, this. But did it improve his actions? Did he come and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is the difference between this person and shaitan? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam. But his response was, أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِنْهُ, that I am better than him. So knowledge without action, it at that point is going to be a trouble for you on the day of judgment. So any knowledge we seek, action should be something that we want to follow with. So anytime you go to Hajj, we mentioned, that knowledge becomes obligation. You write a contract for your business, you have to know how to write it Islamic. That knowledge becomes action. But if you seeked out the knowledge, but you didn't write it the way how we should write it as Muslims, this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives tafdeel. He prefers, you find a brother new to Islam, he learns that he has to pray, he prays. He learns that he has to fast, he fasts. So this in and of itself, brothers, is going to come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the younger folks, inshallah ta'ala, mention one particular ayah, and we'll end there because it's almost time. This is very, very important. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed that you shall worship none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a decree shar'i. You don't have an option here. You are decreed that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And the next one, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and that you are dutiful to your parents. إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرُ أَحَدُهُمَا, if one of them were to reach old age, أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, do not say even uff. وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا, do not even say uff, and tell them like a generous and a nice word. So many of us, and my mother has already passed away, many of us, sometimes we feel the pain when somebody actually leaves us. In the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to even say the word uff is not something that is going to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what if you start yelling at your mother or father, or where you're actually being disobedient? This is where, like I mentioned, this is a qada that is shar'i. There is no option here. When you deal with your parents, tell them nice words, be kind to them, and even for some reason, if you disagree, remember, if Fir'aun was asked to give respect, I think our mother and father who are from the believers deserve much better, especially if it is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to say the word uff to our ones that actually brought us to this world. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, summarize on something very quick, brothers and sisters. Inshallah ta'ala, if you had a tough time concentrating, I told you tafsir is a very difficult topic to entertain folks. I want you to take just at least one or two things. One thing particular, Shakirun Ali. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even a small deed you do, it is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as you are sincere, inshallah ta'ala, you can hope for His reward. And the other thing, whoever still has parents, inshallah ta'ala, let us try our best to be kind and generous and not to say anything that is going to be displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will end here inshallah ta'ala. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta.